Okay, everyone, welcome. I am Sean Pope. I am an associate professor of business strategy at ESX School of Management, and I would like to talk to you today about making it triple blind, it being peer review. Over this little bit, I'm going to make an argument in favor of triple blind peer review. So I'm actually going to be advocating for this change that's not currently part of any process at a journal that I know of. And then at the second half of the presentation, I'll talk about strategy, and this is where I can get your feedback and your counter arguments and tips and advice, and maybe you can connect me to people, things like this. So first half, application, second half, strategy. Uh, the case that I'm going to be talking about throughout this presentation are top management journals. This is the case that I know the best. I'm not sure if the argument would have the same force for other journals and other fields. So, what is triple blind peer review? Well, publishing looks like this. You are an author, you've been working on a paper for some time. It's finally in its final form, and you're ready to submit it to a journal. And you have to, my lights just went off. Of course, you have to publish in a journal if you want your publication to count for something. And once you send it to the journal, assuming that it passes the initial sniff test and it's appropriate for that journal, they're going to assign it to an editor. Let me say right up front, so I can get this out of the way, journal editors are doing a service to the field. They have a very difficult job that's unpaid. They have to tell the top journals 90% of people that I'm sorry, we can't publish your paper because of some reason. And this is quite a prestigious job. So we should all be thankful for that we have the editors that we do have. Once the editor is assigned, it is sent out to peer review. These are 2 to 3 reviewers. They are peers in the sense that they're probably working in the same area as you. They give recommendations to the editor as to whether the paper should proceed to be published, get invited for a revise and resubmit, etc. Double blindedness is the situation where the reviewers don't know the identity of the author, and the author does not know the identity of the reviewers. And everyone that I've ever talked to, I think I can speak for the field at this point, at this stage in my career, we all believe that double blindedness is good and right. And we can come up with easy arguments for why this should be the case. If the reviewers don't know the author's identity, then the author cannot retaliate for reviews that they consider for quality. The anonymity gives the reviewers the freedom to speak and write freely about their actual opinions about the paper. And this anonymity also prevents the reviewers from using irrelevant characteristics about the author to guide their decisions. So this could be where the author got their PhD. Yeah, where the author got their PhD, gender, race, ethnicity, who was their PhD advisor, what is their publication history, what university are they currently working at. All of these characteristics that social scientists have been showing again and again for decades influence our judgments about other people's competence. Triple blindedness is the situation where the journal editor does not know the identity of the author. Currently, the journal editor knows exactly who the author is. And the journal editor, I should mention, has the sole prerogative to decide whether the paper is invited for resubmission or continues along the publication track. In fact, the journal editor sometimes overrides the reviewers and goes with what they think is right. And so where it matters most, the current peer review system is not blinded at all. In fact, it's not anonymous. This strikes me as I think, a little bit weird to me because I think the same arguments that would apply between the authors and the reviewers should also apply to the journal editor. The journal editor is only human, like the rest of us. And in fact, these rules do, in fact, change. These are not hard and fixed roles that people are playing. Authors are sometimes reviewers. Sometimes the reviewers are actually secretly members of the other editors at the same journal. The editor, undoubtedly, if they've reached this position in their career, is actively publishing at other journals. Frequently, other editors from other journals are submitting to this journal, and the editor is having to decide whether to publish something from an editor at another top journal that they themselves would like to publish in. So let me shift gears. Having said that, I would like to talk a little bit about the importance of editors' decisions. Basically, our lives or our livelihood depends on it. Let's go back to the author on the previous slide. Uh, these publication decisions impact our sense as authors of purpose or impact. Many of us got into publishing for noble reasons because we wanted to have some sort of impact on the marketplace of ideas. If we're unable to publish, then we're not able to influence the field. Publication decisions also influence our sense of self-esteem or efficacy. Presumably, we submitted our article to the journal because we thought it had a decent chance of being published. If in fact it gets rejected, this can lead to that mini depression that we all know when we get a decision that was unfavorable. The coin of the realm for moving between university positions is the peer-reviewed publication, ideally in a top journal. There were definitely periods in my career, if I did not immediately have a publication, then it would have been very difficult for me to get a job. And potentially I would have had to leave this career path that I know and love. Publication decisions also influence your salary. In my university, you get publication bonuses, awards, grants. Whether you make it to the next position, you get promoted from assistant to an associate to a full professor, and then as well as your status and your reputation in the field. So the implicit argument that I'm making here is that decisions that are extremely important should be made with the highest integrity. To put this in more context of the publication game that we're all playing now, this system has gotten more and more competitive over the years. In fact, I would say that it's dog eat dog hyper competition where we are now. And in such a system, even very small factors can be determinative. So let me give you one example. This is Journal of Management Studies. It's a Financial Times 50 journal. It has quite a large impact factor. And I recently attended one of their paper development workshops, and they showed submission figures to this journal over the most recent years. And you can see from 2019 to 2022, the number of submissions went up by, I don't know, 60, 70%. I would expect in the future that the number of submissions would continue to go up, if only because AI has made writing papers a lot easier and has removed a lot of the drudgery from publishing or from writing and putting together papers. Publishing today is a zero-sum game, at least at the top journals. They only have a limited amount of slots. They only get published a certain number of times per year. And so if there is bias, this is a crime with a victim. We may not know who the victim is, but To publish one submission is not to publish another one. And to give you an example of just how limited the slots are, we could take the example of the UT Dallas 24 list. A lot of promotion decisions in the United States are based on whether young assistant professors are able to publish in this University of Texas Dallas 24 list. On the one hand, there's 24 journals on this list, which seems like a lot. But on the other hand, from the perspective of any individual researcher, there's only 8 or 9 journals that you could potentially publish in based on your research expertise. So for me, I'm a general management scholar, and there's no universe that exists where I will be publishing in a finance journal or an econ journal or even a HR journal or a marketing journal. So really, it's quite limited at the top. Okay, let's talk about the potential for editor bias. Uh, I don't know if you all know who this smiling gentleman is, but I will tell you. This is Nikolai Foss, Professor Foss. He is a full professor at Copenhagen Business School. One very interesting thing about him is he has the most industrious CV that I've ever seen in my life. If you go to his Google Scholar and you count the number of publications that he was able to publish last year, it was 30, 30. And many of these publications were in the very best journals in the field, the very top ones that have a 5 to 10% acceptance rate. So he has a lot of experience in publishing. And recently he published or he posted to LinkedIn about editorial, the potential for editor bias. I'll just read this. Editors, especially at top journals, are confronting an expanding pool of high quality manuscripts. That's more or less what I just said in previous slides. In this situation, making editorial decisions increasingly becomes a judgment call. A potential problem is that quality can be a cover for editorial moral hazard, i.e., editors are in a position where they can trade favors with authors, help their friends, etc. If such suspicions of such practices emerge, it may threaten the quality of submitted manuscripts. I don't know. Does it happen? It's a potential risk. I think Professor Foss is picking up on a larger narrative that's been becoming a lot stronger recently. This is a conversation that we are having as academics more and more today. Another example of this is the economics podcast, Freakonomics Radio. This is probably the most listened to economics podcast. And just last month, in January, they devoted an entire episode to academic fraud, where they discussed all different types of fraud, faking data, trading favors, stuff like this. I think we're getting to a point in the publishing industry where there's enough stress in the system that people want to ensure that the system itself is as good as it could be. Let's get into editor bias and types of potential editor bias. I want to reiterate a point that I made earlier that I don't think that editors are necessarily, of course, they're not bad people. Even in the case where there is bias, I don't think that this bias is necessarily conscious or malevolent. I don't think there's some smoky room where there's outright skullduggery and quid pro quo and things like this. I think bias is quite different. In fact, there's this concept in sociology called implicit bias, where we may not even be aware of our biases and of our interpretation of other people. And I want to give you an example that is quite analogous to academic publishing. These are orchestras. This is analogous because it's a hyper-competitive thing to be a part of an orchestra. There's only a limited amount of orchestras and a limited amount of seats for each instrument. People work their entire lives to get these seats. It's also analogous in the sense that music has a qualitative element to it. Whether someone plays a piece of music well or not, after a certain point, it becomes a judgment call. For a very long time, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, orchestras were dominated by men. And for a very long time, the theory was that there were biases and stereotypes that were preventing women from joining the orchestra and taking some of the seats. And the initial theory was that if uh, auditioning for the orchestra was blinded, that is, the judge would listen to the auditioning person behind a screen, then this would increase the representation of women because women, in fact, are just as good players of musical instruments as men. In 1952, the Boston Orchestra was the first orchestra to implement this blinded system. And what they found is that the number of women that made it to later rounds did not actually increase, contrary to their expectation. And someone had the idea that maybe this is because as the women are walking onto stage behind the curtain, the judges can still hear the clicking of their heels on the stage, and from there infer the gender or the gender sex of the auditioner. So what they did was they carpeted the stage, they instructed people to take off their shoes, and this actually did increase the representation of women. So that's just a famous study that shows that bias can be implicit, it can be unconscious, but we can go to more specific data. I mean, we actually have some pretty decent studies, although not in management at this point. Here is a study, Equity in Science. The field is ecology, and these authors, much like me, are advocating for a triple blind system. Part of their paper is doing a literature review of studies that have been done on single blindedness. Single blindedness is where the reviewers know the identity of the author, but the author doesn't know the identity of the reviewers. This is sort of an analogous circumstance to what we have now with editors knowing who the authors are. They found that single blinded, or the literature suggests, and I'm not going to go too deep into the findings, single blind peer review is biased against female authors, less well-known authors, authors from less prestigious institutions, and authors from outside the industrialized, rich, English-speaking, and developed countries. Now, that was single blind peer review. We do have an interesting study recently on editor bias. And I think this is also well, this is not in management, it's in another scientific field, but I think the findings are extendable. These authors start off with this mythology that we all live under, which is that a higher quality paper will lead to more favorable reviewer comments, and more favorable reviewer comments will lead to a higher probability of publishing that paper. What these authors did was they controlled for the favorability of reviewer comments and then looked at conditional on that, whether author characteristics would increase the probability of being invited for a resubmission. And the variables that they looked at were whether the first author was a male and whether they were from a country with a high human development index. And what they found was that combinations of these two characteristics and the favorability of reviewer comments could increase the likelihood of being invited for publishing by up to 15%. Now, you may say 15% is not a lot. Sean, why don't you just toughen up and you can be 15% better than the competition? Stop complaining. Let's get on with it. But I would suggest to you that I think 15% is actually incredible. Even if it's half of that, it's a lot. And this is the reason why. Publishing is a repeated game. The average possibility of publishing in a top journal, we could say this is 10%. This implies that it takes 10 times to have an expected value, 10 submissions to have an expected value of one publication. And if there's someone out there that has a 5 or 10% additional probability each submission of publishing based on their immutable characteristics, the cumulative probability gets very high very quickly. So you can have someone by the third or fourth submission, they have a 30, 40, or 50% chance of getting a successful outcome as compared to you. It strikes me as high. It strikes me as very high. Looking at, that paper used Human Development Index, which I think is a proxy for geography. I just want to show you what the geography of the publication headquarters looks like. If we go back to the University of Texas at Dallas and we look at their 24 list of journals and we try to locate them on a map in terms of what university are they associated with, who founded them, where are their headquarters? They publish on behalf of which society? Is it the Academy of Management? Is it the Academy of Finance? Something like this. Let me show you where those 24 journals, and these are the cream of the cream, the top of the top. Here's where they're located. This is not a mistake. There's one continent here. It's North America, which does not even, there's one country, I should say. It's the United States. And meanwhile, their entire continents, South America, Asia, Europe, that they're not represented at all. I want you to imagine trying to play what trying to play this game might feel like if you are from the Balkans or you are from Indonesia or you are from Vietnam. Basically, you're going to think that this is a heavily networked game with a very strong epicenter, which is the United States, and it's very strongly colored by American norms and American mentality. I am American, and I can tell you, we think about things a certain way, for better or worse, and we do have a culture. Nonetheless, even if there were no biases, potential, real, or otherwise. Of course, we can't know this. All studies are flawed. But even if we could, in theory, rule it out, but in practice we can't, I would suggest to you that appearances actually do matter. Whether you buy my argument here or not, I think there is a strong enough suspicion, there's a strong enough doubt that we should be pushing journals to implement the highest integrity standards as possible so that we can all have more faith and trust in the system. In fact, we are living in an era of declining trust in institutions. This definitely includes academia, but it also includes a lot of other institutions, the courts, the media, uh, the police, big business, accounting, etc. Uh, this is a general macro trend that's taking place worldwide. And I think in an era of such trends, uh, on the one hand, it's a macro trend, but on the other hand, there's things that our institutions can do to improve themselves and to instill more trust in themselves. And I think implementing uh, triple blind peer review is one such thing, particularly because, at least to me, and I want to take your feedback at the end, it seems like a relatively simple implementation. We can go back to my previous slide, and this is what I would think it would look like. You are the author, you have your publication, you want to submit it to a journal. I just left out in the previous slide an additional step because it wasn't so important there. But basically, whenever you submit to a journal, there's a handling editor who does basic things. They check the length of the article, they check the formatting, they they see if it has a basic fit for the journal. This editor could quite easily remove any identifying characteristics of the author from the paper, then send it to the journal editor. To prevent any mishaps, this handling editor could select the reviewers to make sure that the reviewers do not in some way know the author. And then the reviewers can give their feedback, their recommendations to the editor who can make their publication decision as usual. So, in an era of doubt, I think particularly if the solution is relatively easy, I think it should be implemented. Uh, okay, I'm going to kind of switch gears and set up the latter half of this discussion on strategy to talk about a vision for the future. What would our lives and our field look like in a circumstance of triple blind peer review? I think part of getting people to change is actually motivating them. And we see this in the corporate world with vision statements to try to motivate employees about how their work can actually change the world. Let me give you a vision for the future for triple blind peer review. I think straight away, one thing that triple blind peer review will do is that it will increase trust in the system and it will increase our credence in people. Under this system, if you encounter someone who's managed to publish many, many times in top journals, I think you can rightly and unquestionably just be impressed by them because they could have only done it by the quality of their papers. And that was the only thing that was under consideration. I think if that is the only thing that's under consideration, and peer review has no potential, or at least very limited potential, to be biased by stereotypes and things like this, then this will lead to higher quality studies. I believe that triple blind peer review will also increase and promote authenticity in our lives. I'll give you a little personal example. As a graduate student, I was advised to attend conferences. And I remember thinking, why would I want to do that? That's my vacation time, and I'm an introvert. I don't want to talk to people. And moreover, the comments I get at conferences are not actually that good because no one at the conference has read the actual paper. They're just responding to some PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint is not the ultimate format that's going to be submitted to the journal. But they said, no, no, the conferences, this is where you get to meet journal editors, and it's important that they know who you are and that they think you're competent, and this is your chance to kind of get to know them. And so I've been to paper development workshops, and I always had this kind of feeling of inauthenticity in my interactions with editors. Do they think I have ulterior motives? I'm also a gaffe machine. I don't know if you guys know this, but I routinely say things that I regret, and I spend a lot of time agonizing over whether people took that personally. And I think under this system, you can just be who you are with editors because at any rate, they're not necessarily going to know that your paper, even if they get it, that's under review. Part of this authenticity is also our choice and who we work with. Some other advice I got as a graduate student was that I should try to put big names on papers, not only because they have experience, presumably, but it's also good signaling. Imagine if you have two or three well-known authors on the paper, and then you submit that to an editor. The editor is going to think that this paper has already kind of been pre-approved by people who know their stuff. Under a triple blind peer-reviewed system, you can just pick the authors that you want to work with. It can be two, it can be three. There's no need to, stuff new authors. You just work with people that you generally want to work with. If our personal brand features into this bias or this expectation that people form about us, Under triple blind peer review, there's no need for us to do any of this personal branding for the sake of presenting this image of our competence. LinkedIn, Twitter, maintaining affiliations with other universities. At the end of the day, it's not going to matter. It's just your paper that's under review. Uh, I'm longing for the day when the acknowledgement section of submissions is also uh, becomes irrelevant. As you know, in the cover letters and in the acknowledgement sections, this has kind of become a genre unto itself today, where people are trying to stuff as many big names as they can and to thank them for the magnificent contributions that they've made to the paper that's under review. All of this signaling I mean, of course, you can do acknowledgements after publication, but during the publication process, this is going to become irrelevant, and I think happily so. Okay, strategy for changing things. I want to, over the next year, 2 years, start talking to people, start getting their perspectives, start filling in my blind spots, and and just really have a mission so far to make peer review fairer with regard to triple blind publishing. I think this mission is decent as it stands. It's abstract, it's motivational, but because it's abstract and motivational, it really should be translated into some specific objectives. So this is the objective I'm giving for myself in 2024 and 2025, to have a single triple blind Financial Times 50 journal by the summer of 2025. This is my SMART goal. It's specific. It's Financial Times 50 journal. It's measurable. I'll know whether I've done it or not. I think this is attainable. It's relevant. It's time-based. Here are my strategies, and this is where you guys can help me in a minute. I kind of see this as a two-step process. In the first step, I'm going to be learning and talking to people and giving talks at other universities. This is what I'm doing now, my inaugural talk today. Eventually, I'm going to start posting on LinkedIn. Uh, I will probably, over the next week or month, start a change.org petition that you could sign if you buy into this. And then the second half of the strategy is going to be going into the lion's den and hopefully meeting with editors and trying to get their perspective, and also publishing op-eds and opinion pieces and agitating polemically as a writer in an essay form to anyone who will listen. As far as tactics go, you can share this video on LinkedIn if I like it, but if we'll see. Tag editors. I'll probably start a mailing list that you can join. I'll give you my mail right there. You can connect me to department heads for talks at other universities, and you can connect me to editors. Okay, that was my argument. I would like to take questions, comments, advice, and counter arguments. And at the very end, we'll do a quick vote. After you've had a chance, you've already heard me speak, but after you've had a chance to listen to other people speak freely, maybe you'll have a fuller understanding. And I would appreciate it if you would vote anonymously for whether you think peer review should change or whether the status quo is okay. Thank you.